Hello everyone. Today I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about wealth and loyalty. What happens when a billionaire's perfect life unravels in one devastating night? It starts with a memory. A memory that was supposed to be buried under ash and grief. Elena's fingers were numb, not from the cold, but from the weight of the past. Every year, on this exact date, she sat in this dim apartment and opened the cedar chest. It was her penance. She would touch the tiny, yellowed knitted booties. She would inhale the fading scent of lavender that clung to the blankets. She lived in a museum of what used to be. But tonight, the air felt different. It felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm. As she reached for a stack of old letters, something slid from a hidden compartment at the bottom of the box. A small, blue strip of plastic. It skittered across the floor, catching the dim light of her single lamp. Elena froze. Her heart didn't just beat, it thrashed against her ribs. It was a hospital bracelet. Faded, scuffed, and stained with something dark. But the numbers. The numbers were burned into her mind. 882J. The night of the fire, the sirens, the smoke that choked the lungs of the city, she had been told her son was lost in the blaze. She had been told there was nothing left to find. But this bracelet, it hadn't been lost in the fire. It had been kept. Tucked away like a trophy of a crime. Elena whispered, her voice breaking, "No. No, that's impossible. How did you get this?" 3 years. That is how long Elena had lived as a ghost. 3 years of waking up to a silence so loud it felt like a physical weight. She had spent those years scavenging for scraps of truth, and tonight, the scavenger had found her prey. She stood at the periphery of the Sterling ballroom, a shadow in a thrift store black dress, feeling the heat of the 1,000-watt chandeliers. The air here didn't smell like rain and old wood, it smelled of expensive lilies, aged bourbon, and the suffocating scent of old money. Across the sea of silk and diamonds, the Sterlings reigned. Julian Sterling, the man whose name was etched into the skyline of every major city, stood like a monument to power. His hand rested on the waist of Victoria, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and cold as a diamond. And then, there was the boy. Leo. The golden heir. The miracle child of the Sterling dynasty. As Elena watched him, the world around her blurred. She didn't see a billionaire's son. She saw the way he tilted his head when he laughed. She saw the specific, almond shape of his eyes, the exact same eyes she saw in her own reflection every morning in her cracked bathroom mirror. It was a biological impossibility. It was a theft. Victoria Sterling spoke haughtily to a circle of socialites, saying, "Oh, Julian, darling, the charity drive was a triumph. The press is absolutely enamored with Leo. He truly is the future of this family." A rapid succession of camera shutters clicked, the flashes momentarily blinding the view. Elena's hand tightened around the small, heavy envelope in her clutch. Inside was the digital archive she had spent months hacking into, the hospital's original, unedited records. The birth certificate that didn't match the boy's face. The truth was a jagged blade, and she was finally ready to cut. The ballroom noise faded into a dull, distant, underwater hum. Elena slipped away from the crowd, her lungs burning. She needed to find Julian. She needed to look him in the eye and see if there was a shred of humanity left in that hollow chest. She turned a corner, her mind racing through the legalities, the risks, the sheer madness of her plan. And then, she hit a wall. Not of stone, but of silk, expensive perfume, and pure, unadulterated malice. Victoria Sterling stood there, blocking the path like a predator in a designer gown. Victoria didn't look surprised. She looked insulted. Her eyes swept over Elena's cheap dress with a disgust so profound it felt like a physical slap. Victoria spoke, her voice cold and sharp, asking, "You? I thought security had cleared the riffraff from the East Wing. What are you doing here, Elena? This isn't a soup kitchen." Elena replied, her voice trembling but gaining strength, I'm not here for your charity, Victoria. And I'm not here for your money. I'm here for the life you stole. Victoria laughed, a dry, cruel, rattling sound, and said, still chasing ghosts? That little tragedy at the hospital was years ago. You were a nobody then, a broken girl with nothing, and you're a nobody now. You're a footnote in a history you'll never be part of. Leave now, before I have you dragged out in front of the entire board of directors. Victoria's heels clicked away aggressively, echoing in the long corridor. Elena stood frozen. The insult stung, but it was the look in Victoria's eyes that burned, a look of absolute certainty that she had won. Elena reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the cold, hard plastic of the blue bracelet. The evidence was a ticking bomb, and the fuse was already burning short. The crowd's murmur rose like a tide. A sudden, jarring hush fell as Victoria led Elena into the center of the ballroom, under the blinding, unforgiving glare of the crystal chandeliers. The guests, the titans of industry, the socialites, the vultures in evening wear, all stopped. They formed a circle, a ring of golden diamonds, watching the spectacle unfold. Victoria's voice rang out, amplified by the silence, dripping with a practiced, theatrical pity. Victoria spoke loudly for the crowd to hear, saying, everyone, please. Do not be alarmed. It seems a former acquaintance of the family has lost her way. She's suffering from some unfortunate delusions regarding the Sterling lineage. It's quite tragic, really. The grief of her past. It can do such terrible things to a fragile mind. Scattered, polite, but devastatingly cruel laughter rose from the crowd, like the sound of dry leaves. The laughter felt like physical blows, striking Elena's skin, bruising her soul. Elena stood there, the center of a circle of mockery, feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. She looked up at the balcony and saw Julian. He wasn't moving to help. He wasn't even looking angry. He was just watching, his face a mask of cold, aristocratic indifference. He was the silent partner in this crime. The heat rose in Elena's cheeks, a burning shame that threatened to choke her. They thought she was a broken woman. They thought she was a madwoman. They thought she was nothing. Elena hissed to herself, just wait. Just wait until they see the truth. I'm not the one who's broken. You are. Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she reached into her clutch with a calm that was more terrifying than any outburst. She didn't hand the envelope to Victoria. She didn't hand it to the security guards. She turned her gaze toward the man standing just feet away, the lead investigative reporter from the Chronicle, a man who lived for the scent of a scandal. The room went deathly still. The air seemed to thicken, turning into something heavy and unbreathable. Elena's voice, when she spoke, wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a blade, honed by years of grief and sharpened by a single, burning purpose. Elena said, her voice commanding and cold, read it. Read the birth certificate for Leo Sterling. Then read the DNA results from the mandatory health screening, the ones the Sterlings paid to have suppressed. The reporter, his eyes widening, began to read. His voice, usually so steady, began to stutter as the words hit the air. The reporter began stuttering, reading aloud, Leo Sterling. Mother, Victoria Sterling. Father, Julian Sterling. Wait. This DNA report. It shows a 99% match to Elena Vance? A collective, audible gasp rose from the crowd, like a sudden intake of air from 100 lungs. The sharp, crystalline sound of a champagne glass shattering on the marble floor echoed through the room. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. The truth wasn't just out, it was screaming. The golden heir was a stolen child. The Sterling dynasty wasn't a legacy, it was a lie built on the ashes of a stolen life. The room erupted into absolute, unbridled chaos. Shouted questions from a dozen directions, the rapid-fire, aggressive clicking of camera shutters, and the sound of people scrambling, chairs scraping against marble, filled the air. The power shifted in a heartbeat. The social hierarchy of the room didn't just tilt, it collapsed. The vultures who had been mocking Elena only moments ago were now swarming the Sterlings, their predatory instincts sensing blood in the water. The reporters, once ignored as mere background noise, were now a wall of microphones and blinding flashes, closing in like a siege. Victoria's face, once a masterpiece of poise and perfection, was now a pale, trembling wreck. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide and pleading, searching for the man who had promised to protect her. But Julian was already stepping back. He was a man who lived by the creed of reputation, and his reputation had just died in a room full of witnesses. He didn't look at his wife, he looked for the nearest exit. Victoria cried out in a panicked, high-pitched voice, losing control, "This is a lie. It's a fabrication. A desperate woman's fantasy. Security. Get them out. Get her out." A reporter shouted aggressively, "Mr. Sterling. Is it true you orchestrated the hospital records change? Did you steal a child to secure your bloodline?" Elena stood in the eye of the storm. She was no longer the victim, the ghost, or the madwoman. She was the architect of their ruin. She watched with a cold, quiet satisfaction as the elite, the very people Victoria had spent her entire life trying to impress, turned their backs on her. They weren't just leaving, they were fleeing the contagion of the Sterling scandal, terrified that even standing near them would stain their own gilded lives. The heavy, echoing, final sound of a courtroom door closing signaled the end. The fallout was absolute. It wasn't just a scandal, it was an extinction event. The Sterling Empire didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Lawsuits, criminal investigations, and a relentless, public disgrace followed the family like a shadow they could never outrun. Victoria was stripped of her titles, her social standing, and her dignity, her name becoming a permanent synonym for theft and cruelty. Julian faced the full weight of the law, facing criminal charges for the systematic tampering of medical records and conspiracy. But for Elena, the victory wasn't found in the headlines or the courtroom drama. It was found in the quiet. The soft, rhythmic, steady beep of a heart monitor and the gentle, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping child filled the space. She sat by the bed in the soft light of a hospital room, watching the boy sleep. Leo. He wasn't a Sterling. He wasn't a trophy or a tool for a dynasty. He was hers. The stolen heir had finally, after years of darkness, come home. The blue hospital bracelet, the one that had been the catalyst for everything, sat on the bedside table. It was no longer a symbol of a life lost in the fire. It was a receipt for the truth. It was the proof that even in the deepest shadows, the truth cannot be burned away. Elena whispered, her voice soft and tearful, "I've got you. I've finally got you." The sound of a child laughing in another room drifted through the air, accompanied by the soft whistle of the wind. Elena had her life back. Her son was safe, his laughter a constant, beautiful melody in their new home. The world had already moved on, as it always does, to the next scandal, the next headline, the next fallen titan. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when the sun began to dip below the horizon, she would find herself looking at the old files. She would look at the charred remains of the hospital records. Elena wondered. She wondered if the hospital fire was truly an accident, or if it was the first move in a much larger game. She wondered if there were other secrets, other stolen lives, buried even deeper in the Sterling archives, waiting for the light of day to expose them. Because once you start digging for the truth, you realize the ground is much deeper than you ever imagined. Thank you for listening to this story of truth and vengeance. Sometimes, the things we lose are just waiting to be found. I'll be back soon with another tale of secrets, lies, and the power of the truth. Until then, keep your eyes open. You never know what's hiding in plain sight.